So mine is going to be a different take on functional fitness. I'm actually going to focus on the last part of the intro of my topic, and it's got to do with functional fitness. As you've heard, I've got a background in health and safety, and my view is that as safety practitioners or professionals, we actually should work or must work very, very closely with HR practitioners, because for HR practitioners, you'll bring in the employees, you'll see them first, you'll see them during whatever happens in their career, and you actually see them last when they leave or when they exit the organization. But you'll create a lot of problems for us safety people, because after my topic, you'll understand why, that there's certain things that should happen in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, and the safety professionals have to be settled with that. Fortunately, I also work in a space where I deal with HR practices or work related to HR, and I love this topic because it relates to people. So yeah, the other concern that I had is that all the HR people are here today, Nene, so nobody's recruiting, nobody's interviewing, nobody's placing, nobody's selecting, so the whole of South Africa has come to a standstill. I hope my CV is floating somewhere. So guys, I hope I can walk around here. I'm actually a mover. So the functional capacity or the functional fitness that I want to speak about, there is a legislative framework which I'm not going to dwell a lot on, because I know and I understand that we have to respect the Constitution of South Africa, and you're right, every person should have their little book, their constitution with them to understand what is it that we do. So there's legislation around fair recruitment. When I say that, it talks to your equity employment, basic condition employment, and so on and so on. But from a health and safety perspective, you talk about occupational health and safety, the Act, and then the Mine Health and Safety Act, and there's also the Marine Safety Act. So there's a lot of pieces of legislation that determines how work is done. But before work is done, you've got to consider the employee first. Then the other one will be the Medicines and Related Substances Control Act. By the way, I wrote a piece for the City Press. Where are they? Just wave. I don't think they've acknowledged me 2-3 weeks ago when the whole marijuana saga started. And I gave my 5 cents on why people should not carry their marijuana to work, dacha, and from a health and safety perspective. So everybody was saying, yay, we're going to have we're free moral agents. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. Keep your dacha at home in your private space. And for a lot of reasons. So that's why one of the piece of legislation that regulates that would be specifically that. And then the big one, the Compensation for Injuries and Diseases Act. Here, both HR practitioners with safety practitioners have to get involved, because if something happens in the workplace, you either run to the HR practitioner to assist you with the forms, and they're like this long and they take forever to sort your problems out. And if you've ever been to COIDA's office, my goodness, I know, I deal with them sometimes. It takes forever to get even a claim number. So I understand the frustrations around it. Then we have regulations. And a regulation that I quoted to someone the other day, even as an HR practitioner, she didn't know that. There's a regulation around breastfeeding. Shake your head if you know. Shake your head if you know. And what it says that the employee is allowed, sorry, it's a code of practice. I'm sorry for saying regulation. Employees allowed 30 minutes prior to work to breastfeed and 30 minutes before they leave. And when I tell employers this, they go like Nene's going, no, don't tell them. But it's my job to educate, because I'm looking after the employee's safety and their health at work. I mean, you know what happens if you're not feeding your child immediately, or something happens, things start showing and you start going, So we don't want to be embarrassed at work. So go and look up and see there is that code that says you have the right. Now, obviously, we had conferences. This is the 1% of people that will go and look for that information. So if you're interested in the breastfeeding part of everything that I've said, this is the 1% of information that you leave with. Right. So I'm not going to explain to you guys how the HR recruitment cycle works, but I want to mention, where do we fit in, or where does this presentation fit in terms of the functional fitness? So there's a recruitment, the advert goes out, you have a job description, and there's a a way, whichever you do it within your organization in terms of your policy. And then there's a selection, yay, and then the person gets hired. However, our dilemma when recruitment takes place is that a lot of focus is made on the actual job description and not on the functional requirements of the position. You want to take another one? So, what does this mean? It means you are not actually your job description. There's another part to your job that will require you to actually do the job. And that's the functional requirements that when we have to look at the placement of the individual, it's not gelling with the recruitment cycle. So this will mean it actually looks at the fundamental position of the person. And I've used the emergency personnel in my slides to explain it to you. And I hope you will appreciate the presentation. And it's not to mock anybody, but I just want to explain certain things. The things that a person has to do that holds the job, and they must be absolutely able to do that job. So get it already in your head. Let's say you work for the military or you work for the police. I'm coming there. This could include climbing, running, stooping, crawling, bending. So those are certain things that we call it's a functional requirement. But I can promise you now, if you're going to look at a job advert, it's not specified in any job advert. Or you say you must have a PhD, and you must have a master's, and you must have 10 years experience and 5 years. But it does not explain, because we've not reached that maturity level in South Africa to actually tell the person, if you're going to apply for this position, these are some of the requirements. And remember, I've said to you that there is issues around fair discrimination. So if you're going to work in this space, certain jobs, you cannot wing it. You've got to be able to do it. And I'll explain as I go along. So we understand what is HR's role. HR has to recruit, make sure that the person fits the position, make sure that all of the above, and you would have heard a lot of that in the morning. So I'm just going to skip this slide. So what is the benefits of making sure that there's functional recruitment, functional fitness in who you are recruiting and why you're recruiting? It has to do with improved productivity. It has to do with the business performance, employee morale, improve engagement, and the medical benefits, and so it goes on. And where I stand, and what is important for us is that there's less injuries. And I'll give a lot of examples as I go along. And then the culture of wellness and health in the workplace. And then at the end, you want to retain employees that can actually do the work, and they're not always sick. And then some of the other benefits is the reduced accidents, and reduce ill health at work, okay? Sick pay costs, you know the story, the insurance costs, the pressure on employees to cover those that are not available or not around because they can't do their work. And the concept of presenteeism, I'm sure by now most of you understand the presenteeism concept, is where somebody's at work, they're ill, but they want to be or they have to be at work because they cannot take more leave or they don't want to be disengaged, so they come to work. Or maybe it's a social thing that they feel more valued at home, at work than at home, so they come to work regardless of that. And then the socialization, I've said. So the example of having the military person, the SAPS person, the traffic cop that you were mentioning earlier on, Nene, what would that person need to do? They need to be able to reach, grasp, lift, bend, stoop, rolling, running, throwing, catching, squatting, kneeling, sitting. And think of all the job positions where you currently have been able to place someone or you're looking to place a person, and those functional requirements actually require the individual to do that. Crawling and walking, running. I mean, I'm saying walking. There are a lot of jobs where a person has to walk from here to there. And an example that comes to mind, I used to work in the railways. So a person would have to walk the line for 3-4 kilometers to make sure that the line is secure. So imagine employing someone that's disabled or somebody that's not able to walk for long kilometers or long periods of time. Now you employ someone that's functionally not fit. He has to walk that line every day, maybe 4 or 5 times a day. You've already created this position for that individual because maybe in the job specs you didn't indicate that as a yard master you're going to have to walk the line 5 Ks a day. And so it goes on. And ascending and descending stairs. I was recently in Australia and I stayed in a certain hotel, and what I noticed is that the person that was helping us with the bags had to run up and down the whole time. So this was a heritage building, and they were not allowed to put a lift in the building. So his job was to help everybody up and everybody down. And I asked him, I said, tell me, how do you cope with having to run the whole day up and down, up and down? He says, you know that I've lost 8 Ks because of this job. And I said, did they tell you that this was the situation? He said, no, he just saw there's a position for a carry guy, a guy that helps with the bags. So things like that would have had to be in his discussion when he started being employed and all that, and he didn't know. So the only good thing is that he lost 8 Ks, but what happens when he gets home? He's like, moch, man, I'm like, tired. He's fatigued. He's useless. He can't do anything. He can't cook. For his wife, he's like, no use. So we go on, and, let's hope he has a wife, right? Yeah, so example here is if you hire an electrician, right? We all know, really, electrician medically, because there's 2 types of medicals, and I'll get to it. An electrician cannot be colorblind. Am I right, Ezra? Right. So we do the medicals. We don't dispute that. But what else does the electrician have to do? He has to climb a pole. He has to go underneath. He has to go around. He has to dig here, and so on and so forth. But the only thing we focus on when we do the medicals is actually the medicals where it has to be placement or pre-placement to actually see if he's colorblind. And I can tell you now, I dealt with an executive the other day, and I asked him, how do you know your driver's not colorblind? He says, no, I just know. I said, but did you do a medical? He said, no, he thinks he's okay. Things like that. You employ drivers, but because they're on the lower end of the scale, you don't include them in the medicals or the functional job requirements. So he's just driving, and then when you see these speeding tickets, you wonder why, because the man can't see what's going on, right? So as an electrician, there's got to be other requirements attached to his job, but because we do not consider them, this is what happens. Now there's accidents. I have to come in. I've got to do an investigation. Only 6 months down the line, I find out the guy is actually colorblind, or he's got an inability that nobody disclosed. And let me go on. So where do we start? It starts with planning. When you as HR or you sit with the person that is the client that wants a position, there's got to be planning. I know things doesn't happen haphazardly, and when there's a vacancy, that's why there's such a high rate of vacancies in government and everybody's acting right. It's because the planning stages takes forever. No, it's not that. It's because we don't really plan. When the position is vacant, we want to fill the position with Ezra that is left, but we're supposed to fill the position, not the person, right? So there's a planning, and what we call as safety practitioners or professionals, a job demand analysis has to be done. It does not happen, I know. It's just, things just happen. And I'll give you an example in the railways, and this is no disrespect to any woman or any person that feels that they are a woman as well, right? So, yeah, I didn't mean to say, can I have some water, please? So, so what happens is we were recruiting for people now, because it's now after 1994 and everybody wants to be included. It's inclusiveness, and we want everybody to come on board. Excuse me. So now we are recruiting females to work in the rail space. And I can tell you now, if you've ever been on a coach or a cab of a railway or the locomotive, they're not this big because they weren't designed in South Africa. They're this small. So now we employ some of us that are this big, and the person has to go on the rung that is this small. I'm not being funny. The woman cannot get up the rung, and now that's not for me the most problematic situation. The problem is if you're involved in an accident or there's a situation in terms of emergency, now the person can't come out of the cab because you're stuck there. So there's a lot of complications, and sometimes we can't get up the rung. The railway, the rung for the rail starts here. It doesn't start on the floor. So now the person has to start on this step, and 10 out of 10 times, it's impossible for a person to get there. You know, I'm talking about women. So now you're in there and you're stuck there. And a lot of times it creates problems because we're not supposed to be on that specific cab. Maybe now when the cabs are bigger, it will work. And later on, I will talk about ergonomics and how it works. So the job analysis requires that at recruitment stage, that we actually do that analysis, that the type of position you are going to fill, what type of person you must be filling that position in terms of their form, their shape, and so forth and so forth. And then the functional requirements go with that. It's no use employing a disabled person and you put them in the position where functionally they're going to be frustrated, they can't do the work, and then you just cause them more harm and hurt because they are now embarrassed and they can't actually do the work. So we have to be very specific in terms of the functional requirements. And this has got nothing to do with discrimination. I'm just being forthright in terms of that. Then there's the placement, the training, education, and communication. Does everybody understand the concept of lone worker? You know what is a lone worker? So we have also employees that are lone workers. These are sometimes security personnel. There are technicians that work like for Eskom, or technicians that work far from in substations. So that position would also require that you do an assessment where you're placing the person, because the placement is actually creating a safety hazard. If that person is working alone and there's no alarm system, there's no trigger to say that after 30 minutes, call us in. You guys remember the incident of the lady that was killed at Eskom when they found a body like a day or so later? That is an example, a specific example of someone that was working alone and there was no other like support structure that says phone in every 30 minutes or phone in every hour. That type of positions I'm speaking about, where you also have to consider that. Now, are they functionally fit? I mean, if that policeman or that guy chases you, right? So this is what I'm talking about, where an employee has to be placed in a position and they're supposed to functionally actually function in that position. If they're not able to, it creates an embarrassment for them, it creates a disposition for them, and they're not able to do their jobs, and it does demoralize them because they are not now in a position to actually say, this is the job that I've been employed for. It's not just in South Africa. British soldiers, 32,000 of them, 2 years ago, they were told because of their poor diets, they were kicked out of the system. They must now go on some kind of diet and come back when they are able to actually run, crawl, stoop, bend, kick, and actually do the work. But with us in South Africa, as Nene was saying, we sometimes don't want to address the pink elephant in the room. We're afraid that this is going to become a transformation or BE or equity employment or affirmative action discussion, and yet you need to address the person and the position. If they can't do the job what you've employed them for, then what's the use of having them around? In China as well, army cannot march on fat stomachs, the Chinese were told. So you know that the Chinese, I mean, they all sometimes look the same, walk the same. And then obviously I think because McDonald's started selling burgers there, they started getting bloated. And the army said, no, sorry. If your stomach is not 88 centimeters, you're out of the system. So it happens. It's not just here. And in South Africa, the same thing. This is an article that was published in 2012. Army tells obese shoulders to shape up. And I'm using this because they are in the business of having to run, and it can happen at work as well. Somebody must just tell me how much time I've got. So what do you need to actually work with this tool? You've got to have a toolkit. There's got to be a work readiness program. If you're not going to have something in place, either from a policy level, from a procedure level, selection, then you're not able to actually implement this. Functional abilities evaluation. So every job should have a functional abilities. So you must go back and look at every position and say, this position requires you to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Physical demand analysis. We actually test this. We let people sometimes carry this. If your job is to carry a bag of cement, they must actually be able to pick it up and carry it for the duration of the job so that you can see they are functionally fit. And the positive side of this is that you can now start implementing programs to assist them, which I'm going to get to. The ergonomic assessments, we should be, or some of us are familiar with ergonomic assessments where you don't want to give a big guy, a small table, he's not able to work on the table, or doors that we are now building that people can't get through, or the environment in the workplace, especially with this open office scenario that's happening a lot. You are stuck in a office where you can't even function psychosociologically as well. So that creates other tensions in the workplace. Let me just carry on with that. So here's just an example of facilities where you actually send an employee to test their fitness. If the job requires that they must bend, they must stoop, they must run, they must crawl, these machines actually give you an isometric reading. And an isometric reading means that when that printout is given to you, the testing is printed in kilojoules. It's not something where the doctor says, okay, lift your hands, let's see, can you lift this thing? This is actual. So you can take that reading and it can become a baseline for where the improvement has to go in terms of rehabilitation, or if you want to put them on a program to say, you were here now, we want you to go to this side of the scale. So the capability does exist. So the HR and the safety professional's role is really to make sure that there's a job match, that the impairments are dealt with, that there's either a rehab treatment recommendations, return to work recommendations, or some ergonomic change or recommendations in the workplace, right? I just want to do some other improvements. So what can the employer do and what can we do? We must encourage healthy eating. So you'll see that this is like very common in the UK, in the US. Canteens are changing. You can't now go and buy a pie and a lot of things that causes people to pick up weight. So the way we order food is changing. The canteen has been briefed, even workshops that you must provide healthier options. There's rebates for insurance if you do improve your health, and company gyms. Now, I'm not sure if organizations are still doing that, but I know there are companies that actually have their own gyms, have a healthy days, smoke cessation days, and things like that. Offer mental health sessions through your EAP. This is just what organizations are doing when you have space at work. Create a situation where they can even have a low exercise, low impact type of exercise where the employees are not like sweating profusely, just something to get their heartbeats. Another popular one is, I said the healthy canteens, maybe showers in the workplace, where if somebody starts a running program that you can encourage your employees to start running and then have the facilities at work. No use letting them come back and they're all sweaty. Also, the one that I liked was the bicycle option. If you're in a big complex or you're working in an eco park, you can have a bicycle station and encourage employees to bring their bikes to work. Now, I know you're thinking, yeah, somebody's going to steal my bike. Not everybody steals things. I mean, not everybody will want to steal a bike. So let's not throw the bicycle before the rack. Try something different. If it works, great. Or sponsor the bikes, and we all know it belongs to the organization, so nobody's going to steal nobody's bike, okay? The functional testing, it's obviously to ensure that people are fit for the task, and the testing continues. I've just given some more examples. I want to end up with these 2 slides. The 14 leadership trends that will shape organizations in 2018. This is what Forbes magazine says, and I want to highlight the 2. That's supposed to mean investing in human capital. In other words, your staff, your people that work for you are the most important. Most important. And the next thing is embracing work-life balance, assisting employees to actually cope with that, amongst the others. And then things like taking issues of sexual harassment serious, taking a stand on social and political issues, and so on and so on, promoting continuous education. But I think the most important one for us is that we embrace wellness and ensure that while we're doing functional capacity evaluations and making sure that employees are fit, that we also provide them with access or the facilities in terms of shaping up so that whatever we say in our policies actually matches our actions. Thank you.
Wow.
Thanks. Thank you. Time.
So, Natalie, thanks for adhering to the time. I like the bicycle thing, though. Ah, that sounds good.
You want to sponsor?
I have a bicycle, but I work from home and they'll steal it from my house. So I need to get a rack for myself to lock the bicycle for myself to cycle. Guys, did you enjoy that? Informative, right? So we're going to do questions just because we have time. So is there anybody that would like to ask some questions? I'll go for, say, maybe 3 or 4 questions will be good. So I'll start with the lady here because she's closer. And then you can start asking all. Make it a difficult question, right? Yes, Vince, just it's the 2 and 1. Go. The mics are on. Don't switch anything. There we go.
Thank you for the presentations. My question is mainly for Ms. Nene Molefe. Where would you place because for instance, in our organization, we have employee engagement strategy, and we also have a unit that does diversity management. And what we've realized that we are linked in a way, but how we approach, because when we focus on diversity and inclusion, on engagement, it might differ with how they do that diversity management. Where would you really place the two? If you have to put it in one office, or should you continue to do things differently?
I think the best way that I have seen, if you already have people in the organization, one taking care of the EE and the other diversity and inclusion, as long as they report to the same person, the first most ideal, if one person were to do that, it would, because sometimes you trample on each other's toes, because you cannot do, for example, employment equity on its own without looking at the systemic aspect of where are some of the tripwires hiding within the system. And whoever is doing diversity and inclusion is looking at both attitudinal issues of diversity and inclusion and systemic. So if people are already there, as long as they work so closely together and report to the same person. But if you have an opportunity to restructure, for me, if it's done in one office, is the best.
Thank you. Next question.
Thanks.
Can you stand, sir? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks for the presentation. I think often diversity management is seen as one of the soft issues in most organizations. And I just want to check as to how would that be seen to be, more strategic, and how would you ensure that, there's a business case for diversity management? And secondly, the issue of most companies and government departments have values, and they would talk around issues of organizational culture. And there will be a number of interventions to that effect. But I think what I would want to know, how do you measure to ensure that, the organizational culture has been embedded? What are the elements, what are the strategies that you could share with us in terms of ideas to measure to ensure that, the culture is embedded? And lastly, the issue of wellness, especially wellness support in terms of EAP. Often EAP practitioners have a challenge where you're providing support to an individual, but you find that at some point you don't know when to stop providing support. And if you could guide around, when do you stop as a wellness practitioner? Thanks.
Thank you.
To start?
Okay, I'll start because I've only got the short question. I don't think you can ever stop. I know that when service providers sell us packages, they'll say 20 phone calls and 2 telephone this and 1 contact session. It is also something that has to be a relationship that has to be established with individuals, supervisors, and peers. Because let's say somebody has a drinking problem or is an alcoholic, until that person has overcome that, it's not going to take 6 weeks. Remember, we think that sending the person for rehabilitation is going to get them over the problem, because now there's an element of where the family needs to get involved. There's an element where the employer needs to know that there's a disease. There's an issue with the person having a disease. So sometimes you even have to bring in the religious part of this for counseling. So EAP depends on whether you have structured in such a way that the sessions have been locked in. I don't agree with that model because you know that other employees also don't access that EAP. So when EAP is negotiated, the package or the service that is available must make sure that it takes the employee right to where you can actually know that now he's achieved wellness. I've often disagreed with the notion of this thing of 2 telephone calls and then you can only see the granny and not the mother. And it's up to us as practitioners, including safety practitioners, to make sure that when you get that service, it actually works for you. I've seen, and I don't want to mention the organization, I've seen where employees will call in like 6 times a month, but the company that's providing the service is coining like 700,000. And they too need to be managed because they must know they must go the extra mile. So they won't solicit more help or more engagement with employees. So you need to make sure that service works for you. So I think that's my short answer in terms of managing the process and making sure the employee is well till the end. Whatever that end is, whether they leave the organization through a dismissal or incapacitation. Okay?
One more?
Thanks. I thought I was answering the other question. On specifically around the business case and when organizations see this as a soft issue, there are 3 things that I normally see being helpful in organizations. One, and I might come across as if I'm selling my book. Maybe I am. It is at the stands of knowledge resources today. But we've developed what is called a 10-step model for ensuring that there's more what we call iterative culture change, because you cannot deal with diversity and inclusion as a workshop approach, as I said earlier. So what helps is that if your organization does not come up with a vision to say, what is this ideal culture that you're working towards? What is this vision for transformation and diversity? You'll find that people going through circles and doing interventions, and they don't know to what end. That is why when I started, I showed you the Constitution. It helps in anything to say, what is our North Star, right? So if with the top team, and we often work with the ExCos, we develop what is the vision for transformation or diversity and inclusion, separate from the corpus, what you call a vision for your company. That helps so that everybody knows where we're going. The second thing that is helpful is that, having done a lot of workshops and facilitations and focus groups all over, I have found that there are 4 things that concern leaders anyway, any industry, any country. 4 things. Number 1, so let's say you're working within and you are responsible for transformation or diversity within an organization. Positioning is always critical. So let's say, my tip is that start by saying, standing here, I understand the following. What is of concern to you as leaders is number 1, how to attract and retain talent, right? Anybody who's a leader, that's critical. Number 2, how to ensure shareholder value and returns. Number 3, how to ensure that the customer, you are in alignment with the customer or client satisfaction, whichever word you're using, whether customer or client. Number 4, if you look at your organization, do the ethics that you are following, do they permeate through all levels to ensure that there's community and stakeholder expectation? If you stand in front of your leadership team and you say, I, as a transformation manager or HR or diversity manager, I know that these are the 4 things that are of concern to you. Therefore, diversity and inclusion are not an end in itself. It's a means towards an end being the vision of company X or Y. However, very critical, as you position it that way. However, while I'm saying this is an end, this is a means, not an end. If you ignore this means, you will get to a total shutdown. If you can use an example of Marikana because it was in the news and all that. If you read beyond that what was actually happening, it started with a lot of dissatisfactions, and it's not only the only organization, many other organizations. That often, if you ignore the people, the so-called soft issues, right? It will get to a point. You know how you present your survey? There's green, yellow, and red. some of the organization is no longer red, it's maroon in terms of the people issues. And if you ignore those people issues, you'll get to a point where the business is a standstill. You know, some of my relatives live in Rustenburg. I was, during that time where there was a stopover with regards to the issues at Marikana, there's a ShopRite Checkers that I usually know. I know that the retailers were saying, can't this mine sort out what is happening to them? Look at how empty my shop is. Now, those people had nothing to do with the mine, but because the patronage, they rely on people in their mind. So it does impact the bottom line. So it is incumbent upon the people inside the organization to demonstrate to leaders, to say whether you like it or not, the people issues do impact at the end of the time, at the end of the day. They do impact on the bottom line. The last tip that I can give you, let's say you're dealing with your senior leadership, there's an exercise that you can do. I often say quickly, if people are sitting here, how many, if you say, think back of a time where you were excluded from something, right? And then people think they don't even have to share that. And then I say, if you attach a feeling to that incident of being excluded, what is the feeling? And people will say frustrated, sad, irritated, isolated, whatever the different words. And if you take that, let's say you wake up in the morning, you are frustrated, you are sad, you are isolated, you are whatever, irritated, all those negative words. How might you show up at work the following day? If I wake up like this, because I feel excluded, there has not been inclusion, if I wake up feeling these things, and the company has evidence from engagement surveys that they never, sometimes not even consider, I show up disgruntled, demotivated, and I go slow. There are so many things. When you look at that, I say don't spend a lot of money trying to say what is the business case for diversity. Just that on your flip chart, that is the business case. Because especially listed companies, if you say, we often talk about a going concern. If a shareholder walks in and sees that people are showing up in this way, they're disgruntled, they couldn't be bothered, even for safety, if I show up in that way, I'm not only in danger for my own safety, but for those around me. Other people are vindictive and all that. So there are exercises, there are tips that you can use to ensure that, first of all, we understand that this company was not created for diversity and inclusion. However, you cannot ignore it, because at the end of the day, it is a tripwire. It will trip you somewhere. I hope it helps.
Okay.
You can buy my book, it has tips.
Nene, you are selling now. You're a bookstore here on the stage. Eh?
Yeah, it has
I don't know if there's a law against that.
No,
I'm just kidding.
there isn't.
I was just kidding. Mr. Kosa.
Okay. In my case, I have two questions. One is all based on the job requirements. In my space of work, as compared to what has been displayed of the obese people. In our case, we have a facility where you only holding males. And as a result of that, you have a center that has got sentenced offenders that are only males. We are compelled to make sure that we comply with the equity targets. And in that space, you can't place a female in that particular center to be able to guard males. So I wanted to check with you whether is it possible for us to be able to apply for deviation in terms of the Equity Act for that purpose of you utilizing the people that are relevant, that cannot be a risk to the environment. Two, we have a situation where in terms of our dress code, the issues of religion are a problem. Issues of beliefs are a problem. You have a situation where you are supposed to shave like I am, but you are also going to get people that has dreadlocks. You will also have on your corporate where you should be able to have the ZCCs putting their badge. You will also find in your space you have sangomas that are putting their beads. And you've got apostolic church people that want to put the wires that are earthing them. So, and in our space, we have a policy that does not allow you to decorate that uniform. So I just need an advice on those particular issues as to say how should we able to tackle those things because I learned that you said that we should be specific. So probably in my advert, I must able to indicate that you are going to wear uniform, so no dreadlocks allowed. You are going to wear uniform, no beads allowed, no wires allowed. On that note, I just need your advice.
I've never had such a difficult question. But I'm going to speak out of first experience and maybe some recommendations. I know I've got a PhD, but I'm not all versed, right? So let me take you back to the question on the dreads. I once worked for an organization, and we were dealing with Pakistanis, and I don't know if you understand, some of them actually put a turban on their head, right? And this area where we were in Tanzania, they refused to unturban their hair, to wear a hard hat. So it became a safety issue because our rules specifically said, if you work here, you must wear a hard hat. Now, let's be practical. Sometimes we, as safety people, and I'm going to admit it, our rules and regulations are sometimes so ridiculous that it's like we create things just to frustrate people. That's why you've got to have a risk assessment and understand how is this turban going to impact the person's head from getting injured and all that. So I had a discussion, I sat down, and I'm going towards even the dress code issue that you sort of alluded to. So we had a discussion with the men, and the other thing was they weren't welcoming to myself being a woman. So I had to have like a man coming with, accompanying me to the session. And because I was the senior person, I had a discussion with them on what are the company policies, how do the company's policies interpret their health and safety requirements and so forth and so forth. And the guy asked me, would it be a problem if he puts little wooden blocks in his turban on his head and he turns it in that turban so that it protects his head? So naturally, if something falls on you and you've got blocks of wood in your head, it's going to create another impact. I mean, we understand science, momentum, It's going to create another injury because of the impact on the bricks on your head. But with this situation, we had to get to a point where we negotiated halfway because it would have been tools down and they wouldn't have worked. And that was the help or the contractors in the area. Nobody else was going to come and do that work. So here we relaxed it because of religious reasons and because of practicality. And he wasn't going to put that hard hat on top of his head because it looked stupid, firstly, and secondly, it was impractical for him to force this thing on. So we had to relax his organization to respect their religion. As far as uniform and dress code, and this comes up even when women are dressing or men are dressing in a way that the organization feels it's not incumbent of their dress code or their policies. For me, it's an education issue where you need to sit with people and explain to them the reason why we don't allow X, Y, and Z. It's for this, that, and the other reason. But I want to come back to the engagement. When you engage employees at the beginning, even before you put out the advert, isn't it funny that when employees join the organization, and I'm speaking honest now, as HR practitioners here, they will sign anything to get that job. Man, the moment they're in that job, now they want to change the rules. They want to tell you where to get off and how to run this organization. And that's the problem. So I found that with some of our employees that I was engaging, that they had contracts that were like 25 years old. Because as practitioners or professionals, we don't renew the contracts as the policies or as the environment changes. So that's the one thing I think you as a professional must go back to. But you're right, if you are going to be expected to wear uniform, and let's say the uniform you are expected to wear high heels, you have to advertise or you have to indicate that either at the recruitment selection situation where you say to the person, your job requires that you must wear high heels because this is the look and feel or this is the decorum that we have here. I'm thinking of the bobbies. I'm not sure what is their official name. The guys that stand there in England in front of the King's Gate. they stand there the whole day. You can even do this, they will not move. Because they have to keep that head on whether it's rain or shine. And they understand that my job requires me to be in this uniform, doesn't matter what happens. And I think that's the dialogue that is missing. As far as your requirements, remember there is a thing called inherent requirements of the position that you've got to put out there to say to the employee or prospective employee, there's a certain inherent requirement of this position where you are required to do X, Y, and Z, and this is where I'm coming in with your functional requirements. So it's a long process, but you need to start correcting the positions. And I can't assist you with the wires and the badges that people put on, but I see it as an area where if you have a policy, there's got to be disciplinary process, because what are you saying? I mean, if you're working in the military, you don't see people putting patches and badges and stuff on them. For me, it's a plain discipline issue where people just do what they want to do. I can't comment on the hair, but I don't think if your hair is going to impact on your job, then it's a problem. But I think hair for me is neither here or there.
Can I just quickly throw in, especially responding from
Yes.
a religious diversity point of view? In my work in this field, I have never seen something that fundamentally creates unity like respect, right? For example, you used, in your explaining the thing, you used an example about something that people had on their wrists that might earth them and all that. And I know you were explaining and people laughed. Let me give you an example that for me, what sometimes is lacking, and I like the fact that Natalie is talking about dialogue, because in cultures, in organizations, we need to check as to what is the normative culture. If me, because I belong to the ZCC church, therefore I'm the one who must be taking off my badge, and we are not sitting down around a dialogue to say, in order for us to meet somewhere in the center, what is it that you must change? What is it that you must change? What is it that you must change? As opposed to pointing at one or two people that you must change this so that you fit into the culture. In diversity, we talk about something called the framework of diversity. It has 4 quadrants. The first one is exclusion. People who are treated as if you are outliers, you don't fit in. And then we have a quadrant called assimilation. And then the one that says differentiation, and the one we're all aiming for is the one that called inclusion. Just like when you work with the unions, you have recognition agreement. You sit around the table and say, let us create this thing that we want so that we have an understanding. The problem is often when people come and impose and you become the only one, as if you are the only focus. You must change. Nobody else must change. That is why schools had problems with the hair and all that, because we don't sit down and afford people the respect to say, let us engage, because what might be a point of laughter to you, for me, is something that is very serious. So, and I've seen that respect goes a very long way. You only get it if you sit down, you engage, and employees are very reasonable. Once you hear that, in fact, this thing of yours is a danger to whatever safety measures, I respect the fact that I was engaged on that issue, rather than I felt isolated.
Thank you.